This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time. Content presented in the following podcast is for information purposes only. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host and guest and may not represent the views and opinions of the Whole Care Network. Always consult with your physician for any medical advice, and always consult with your attorney for any legal advice. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.
Welcome to Us Versus Them, Patients and Caregivers Confront Healthcare. I'm Marianne Sterling. Thank you for joining us, and buckle in. Today's topic is likely one that you may not have heard of, a condition impacting millions of people, predominantly menopausal women. It's called frozen shoulder. I experienced this condition personally a few years ago, and I'm joined today by two incredible women who are currently navigating frozen shoulder themselves. My friends Teresa Wilbanks from Sustainable Caregiving and Michelle Hauk from Circle of. Welcome to you both. The fact that we are all over the age of 50 is important to this discussion, which you will hear more about momentarily. So let's set the stage for this discussion with a few facts about frozen shoulder, also known as adhesive capsulitis. Typical symptoms include severe pain in the shoulder joint, gradual loss of range of motion, which impacts the use of the affected arm. There is an unmistakable link to menopausal women, and a recent study estimates that 70% of patients with frozen shoulder are women. What you're going to hear more about today: there is a serious lack of knowledge about this condition within the U.S. healthcare system. We're going to share our stories with you. It is ironic that Chinese medicine has known about this, for about 1,000 years. They even have a name for it. It's called shoulder at the age of 50 years. That's how it translates. They know about it. We apparently don't. And you're going to hear in our stories today a lot of frustration, and you're going to hear a standard prognosis that we have all heard during our journeys. Quote, "It will resolve by itself in 2 to 3 years. So just wait, 2 to 3 years, you'll be out of pain." Now, let's get started with some storytelling because you're going to want to hear this. Teresa, I'm going to start with you. Tell us how it started and your journey through frozen shoulder.
Oh, thank you, Marianne. So the first was my left shoulder, and it was 2016. I was 51 years old, and my shoulder just started to ache a bit. At first I thought it was just because we'd been on a long road trip, and I kept reaching into the back seat with my left arm, and it really got my attention when the pain level increased. And I would just miss a step or just a sudden movement caused excruciating pain. So I could no longer put my seatbelt on with my left arm. And, I decided that I needed to seek help. And we had been living in France for 7 years, so I didn't have a primary care physician at this point. It was a year after we'd moved back, but I just hadn't done that. So I found an orthopedic doctor who specialized in shoulders. And he said it could be impingement. There was something else he named, and he said a cortisone shot should take care of it. Sometimes it takes 2. So he gave me the shot, and he said, if it's not better in 3 weeks, just come back and see me, and we'll do another shot. So I did, because it didn't get better. It didn't change. Nothing changed. So still had the aches and the excruciating pain occasionally, and went back and got the second injection. And again, nothing changed. And so I started to do research, and I actually came across frozen shoulder. And I reached out to a physical therapist, and he said he would see me without doctor's orders. And I went and we had a conversation, and he agreed that it was frozen shoulder. He described several of the things that I was going through where I experienced pain and the immobility. I couldn't, at this point, I don't think I could raise my arm above my shoulder. So it just really immobilizes you. Now, there's a series. I described how first it started with the aching, and then there was excruciating pain, and then there was immobility. So this is the standard process that we all go through. He said it was frozen shoulder, and it would self-resolve in 2 to 3 years, just as you said. Physical therapy might help the process, help it go more quickly. Well, that was just more excruciating pain. And after several sessions, I decided this can't be good, as much as this hurts. I remember at one point, my arm was being tied over my head behind my back, and tears were coming down my eyes. And I had gone through, the exercises and everything, but it wasn't helping. And at that point, I thought that can't be good. So I stopped. So we were heading to China. That was another reason why I went to the physical therapy. I thought if it's going to help it get better quicker, that's going to help with this trip to China. Just imagine traveling overseas, or traveling anywhere, and not being able to, I couldn't put the luggage in the overhead bin. My husband had to help me with everything. I couldn't reach for anything. At that point, I couldn't put a sports bra on. I mean, there's just so many things that you can't do, and still had I can remember in China, we were on a street corner and a piece of paper flew out of my hand, and I went to reach for it, and I went to my knees and just in pain. And here's my husband standing by helpless. Can't understand the pain level. Another time I went down, I missed a step, heading down steps into the restroom. To my knees, I crawled into the bathroom because the pain is just indescribable. So this, at this point I'm told that it's going to self-resolve, but how do you go through that? I couldn't sleep. Sleeping, it just ached so bad at night. It got worse at night, the aching. It wasn't that excruciating, I don't even know how to describe it, this nerve level of pain that if it continued, I wouldn't be able to stand it. So that was my left shoulder. Fast forward to 2021, I was 56, and this time it was my right arm. And this lasted for, at that point, I still have, I don't have full mobility yet, but so it lasted about 18 months of complete misery. And I just decided to not seek treatment. I had done so much research. I understood there were treatments in Estonia, in Canada. It looked like there were things that were happening in these other countries that were helpful, but so expensive, not covered by insurance. Imagine the travel to get there. And there was another procedure called hydrodilation. It looked like from the forums and the research I did that was actually effective, but I couldn't find someone who I had confidence in had done it and could help, and then it wasn't covered by insurance. And I'm just like, suck it up, Buttercup. You've got another 18 months of this. You're just going to have to deal with it. And this time, I believe it was caused by what's called SIRVA, so shoulder injury related to vaccine administration, because I received the COVID vaccine, and it was at the time when they were just trying to get as many people vaccinated as possible. It was sort of an assembly line, and they were using anyone who, had skills and could give you the injection. And this was, I believe, a gentleman who wasn't used to doing this on a regular basis. And it, instead of going into the muscular area of my shoulder, it went into the bursa. And I know because it hurt. It was just the pain when he did the injection was not normal. And that it is a thing, most commonly related to the flu vaccine. But it can happen that this sets off frozen shoulder. And that can be, we'll put the links to all of these things, they'll make them available to you. But once it starts, there's no way to stop it. So again, I just decided I was just going to deal with it. And it was about 2 years. I was caregiving through the first experience, and some of this last one, my father passed away sort of toward the end of it. But just imagine trying to do everyday things, and you basically, one arm is immobilized, because that if you even, after my dad passed, we went on a trip, hiking, paddling, all the things we love to do, all the things that we were trying to do just to recover from 7 years of caregiving. It was either not possible or extremely painful. So it disrupts your life. And the fact that I didn't get diagnosed from a physician. There was not a treatment available. At this point, 3+ years of my life, and now I feel like it's coming on again in my right shoulder. And just, do I have another 18 months? Yeah, is this what my 50s are going to look like?
A couple things that you've shared, Teresa, really stand out to me. I think people understand the level of pain we're talking about here. And for me, I can say trying to explain this to people around me, trying to explain it to doctors and other healthcare professionals, I just didn't have the words most of the time. And I remember in my journey, the day I knew I was standing in front of a person that understood this condition was a gentleman who looked at me and said, "Oh," he says, "that's suicide level pain." And I said, "Yes, now you know what I'm talking about. You get it." So I want our listeners to understand that this is not just a little ache in your shoulder joint, right? This is way beyond that. And I'm also, you talk about the life disruption here. And this is a condition that goes on for years. And that's if you're just lucky enough to get it once in one shoulder. So I'm really struck by the disruption to your life. And I want listeners to really understand that as well. This impacts 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, everything that you do. Teresa, you alluded to this, just reaching for a glass in the kitchen cupboard can bring you to your knees. So there's so much to explore here. And Michelle, I want to get to your story as well before we go a whole lot further, because we have so much ground to cover. So how did your journey start?
So my first case of it started in about 2015. And I say about because I don't have exact times, because when I look back, I don't remember. It's just like a season of pain. And so I actually had a bicycle accident on my right side. And so I had a mild tear in my right rotator cuff. I'm not a pitcher. I'm not an athlete. So I decided not to have it fixed. That actually kind of healed itself. It's not that big of a deal. But about 4 months later, I was like, why doesn't this stop hurting? And why does my wrist hurt now? Why does my elbow hurt? What is happening to my right arm? And I work at a computer. And so I have a mouse for my right hand. I have my keyboard. So I'm riding my bike. I have all of this, what they call referral pain, is when it refers from the act of the top of the shoulder and it refers to your elbow. And so it kind of tightens up your elbow, and then it changes how your wrist works. So it turns into an entire, and I'm right hand dominant. So it turned into an entire right side, super painful, hyper immobile, not hypermobile, hyper immobile. It's basically like having to freeze your right arm to the side of your body. So I had to learn to adapt with my left hand. What happened after I had the right rotator cuff? I went and had MRIs, I had CAT scans, I had all kinds of things done to try and diagnose it. And then I went into my orthopedic surgeon's office. And it was a guy, and at the time I was 45, 46, and he just looked at me. Didn't touch me, didn't do an exam. He looked at me and he goes, "How old are you?" And I told him I was like 45. And he goes, "Do you have diabetes?" "No." "Do you have low thyroid?" "Yes." "You have frozen shoulder, and you're going to have to deal with this for 2 to 3 years." And I just stared at him. And I was like, "Do you have any idea how bad this hurts? Do you have any idea what you are sentencing me to? Is there nothing we can do?" And he goes, "There's nothing you can do. Nothing. You just have to deal with it." And I just stared at him, and tears came down my eyes, came down my cheeks. And I was like, this can't be. Because I too, like Teresa, was caregiving for my sister and my mom, both who had cancer. And not only did it limit me in my job, it limited me in my ability to take care of the people in my life. The type of pain and immobility that we are discussing is life altering. It's not reasonable. And there is nothing you can do to tamp down the pain, and you don't know when it's going to hit you because you assume, I'm walking along, I'm using my mouse at my desk to try and do my job. I had to adapt my entire life to become a left-handed person because writing even hurts because your wrist in your hand is completely engaged with this. The other interesting thing that I was not prepared for, because again, I was dismissed and told basically suck it up, buttercup, just like Teresa, was all the muscles that atrophy on that side of your body when you stop using it. And we all understand that when you stop moving a joint, it actually makes it worse because everything else around it then starts to atrophy and stiffen. So that causes irregularities of your spine and your neck and your hips. And so sleeping, again, like my husband and I, we had to switch sides of the bed we could sleep on because I could not lay on my right side. There's no way. Anyway, that one lasted basically for 4 years for me. And I do have low thyroid. I have Hashimoto's. So that was about a 4-year situation for me. I had about a year off. My left arm, out of nowhere in 2021, I started feeling kind of those echoes. I don't know how to call it anything else, but like these echoes, these weird footprints of pain. And then slowly stopped losing motion. And I went in and I was terrified. I was in tears because I was like, no, this can't be happening again. And now I've had frozen shoulder for about 14 months on my left side, 15 months maybe. I've tried physical therapy. I've tried the cortisone shots, nothing. The physical therapy was actually quite painful, extraordinarily painful. I have fallen as a result of losing balance because you can't balance yourself with the one shoulder. I've had some pretty incredible falls. Again, like when you look at women at our age and you want to work on fall prevention, you want to work on staying healthy and keeping your bone density. You want to do all of these things like we are supposed to. You take your vitamin D, you take all these other things, and nobody can help you. There's no answer. There's nothing. Why is there no support for this if it is something that is so prevalent and so common? And it's not just with women, it is with men too, because I have met men who have also had both shoulders frozen. But it does seem to be, there seems to be something from overuse, and ours appears to be something that's a little bit more just, that's what happens to a woman. And I really don't appreciate that.
And Michelle and Teresa, you too, there is no other chronic condition that I can think of where the prognosis is, oh, sorry, go home. You're going to be in suicide level pain for the next 2 to 3 years. How is that acceptable? It shouldn't be. And I would argue that the statistic that I mentioned earlier, 70% of frozen shoulder cases are in women. I would argue that is a big part of this equation. And I got to tell you, one wonders if, if someone with diabetes went to the doctor, got the same diagnosis. I mean, this is a chronic condition and should be treated as such. We need, obviously, to learn a lot more about it when our healthcare providers are stumped and all they can say to us is, go home. It'll get better in 2 to 3 years. I find that so morally unacceptable.
Yeah, one thing that shocked me was that, my gynecologist, when I first had the conversation with her about it a few years ago, knew nothing about frozen shoulder. I have a gynecologist in my family. She didn't know anything about frozen shoulder. And when it's impacting women, in their 50s, frequently, it feels like frequently, even though we don't talk about it and we don't hear about it. But when you start talking about it, all of a sudden, people have had it. It's sort of astounding that they weren't aware of the condition at all.
Or more interested, right? I mean, my OBGYN, which is interesting because she actually, when I told her I had this and, I was going through menopausal symptoms, her advice was stay curious about it. And I was like, have you ever had a knife shoved in your shoulder and not been curious about it? I don't mean to be a smart aleck about it, but it really is like somebody is, because I did have the MRI where they do put the needle through your bursa to try and investigate what's going on. And I don't know if you guys have seen I think it's like Terminator 2 or Terminator 3, the one where he actually takes, his finger becomes like a knife and it shoots through her shoulder and you watch Linda's face. And I was like, that's it. When I describe people the pain, it is that exact pain and how her eyes get really wide and there's not even a sound that can escape because it's so life altering, that pain. And you can't breathe and you are in shock and you are terrified. All the things, you get all the things, and that lasts for 4 years. No, that curiosity that those professionals are telling us to have, I'm going to challenge back and say professionals in the medical field who do prolotherapy, who work on joints, who are orthopedists, you be curious about it. You get interested in it because there are a lot of people who need some help. Sorry, that was salty.
That's such a great point. And I will share a little bit of my story as well and start by saying the person who provided me the correct diagnosis 13 months after it started was someone who had seen other women like me. And I had to go from Washington, D.C., where I lived at the time, to New York to get a diagnosis. At that point, the person who was curious about it was my menopause specialist. And I'm so grateful to her for being curious, for digging in and trying to figure out what was going on. She was the one who found the link to menopause, the link to the drop in hormones. Then I started receiving the treatment that eventually would work for me, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. But waiting 13 months for a diagnosis, a correct diagnosis, and by the way, in that 13 months, I was diagnosed and treated for Lyme disease. I didn't have Lyme disease. I was told I had a rotator cuff injury. Oops, the MRI did not show that I had a rotator cuff injury. So not only was my correct diagnosis prolonged, but I was treated for other conditions along the way that I did not have. And I will say this much. Right now, we don't have a whole lot of things to call treatments for this condition. Okay. And for many of us, and I know you ladies have mentioned this already, some of the so-called treatments being prescribed by an as yet stumped healthcare community are making it worse. Physical therapy, for many of us, makes this condition worse. Cortisone shots, no, they don't do a thing. Pain medication, good luck with that. I couldn't find anything that even touched the level of pain I was experiencing. So I really want our listeners to hear and think about this part as well, because this is not as easy as, oh, well, eventually I'll get the correct diagnosis and there will be treatments waiting for me. That is not the case with frozen shoulder. As far as treatments that do work, they're few and far between. I will say, in my case, the one thing that fixed this situation was bioidentical hormone pellets. Bioidentical hormone pellets, which I now have inserted in my hip about every 3 to 4 months. Here's the problem with that. Our listeners need to know. They are exorbitantly expensive. They're not covered by insurance. Why? Because they're not approved by the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA. However, this is a obviously life-altering treatment that should be available to more women. It is not. However, Viagra is. So Viagra is covered, and hormone replacement therapy in the form of bioidentical hormone pellets is not. I'm going to let that sit there for a moment. That needs to stop. So Michelle, I'm going to turn to you for this next question. What can you do? What can our listeners do if they suspect they might have frozen shoulder?
Well, I do recommend, before you suspect that you have it, understand that as part of aging, we should have more open conversations, especially with our female communities. Number two, I would say if you have had a shoulder injury or you have had a mastectomy, this is where it hits my family because we are all also BRCA positive. And so that type of surgery, a mastectomy or a double mastectomy, talk with your healthcare provider before you have it done and ask about frozen shoulder as part of the healing procedure, because a lot of women actually get that. It's one of the symptoms after a mastectomy. The other thing that you can do is look at your diet. There's honestly not a lot that you can do except for raise your voice, talk to people, try and prepare yourself right now. There's a lot of information out there about exercises or vitamin D deficiency or eating more salmon, the things, right? Anti-inflammatory diets. Honestly, I can't think of one thing you can do except for mentally prepare that this might be a side effect of an injury or of menopause, injury, surgery, or menopause. And also have somebody in your corner. Find a medical professional who can help you not feel like you're going crazy or ashamed of this pain. Because this is what they call an invisible condition. So people who walk up to you aren't going to know that you can't get out of the way. You can't move the same. Somebody jumps in front of you, you cannot move your arm. They can't tell by looking at you. It's an invisible condition. So sometimes you inadvertently get hurt by situations that are just kind of normal, standing in a crowd or hiking like Teresa did, right? Like you're going to trip. You need to be more stable. You need to work on ways to prepare your partner, whoever your partner is, because this is a long haul as it stands right now.
It is, and I think all of us experienced at one time or other sort of a dismissiveness of the healthcare system when we first started our journeys. I certainly know I did. Providers who, sadly to this day, if they can't easily diagnose something, and to your point, this is an invisible condition. You hear words like, oh, it's all in your head. You're stressed out. Maybe you need more sleep. And these are statements that we can't just accept. We need to fight back against this sort of gender bias that is so oftentimes thrown in our faces by the healthcare system. So I think persistence, is key. And I know, Teresa, just digging in a little bit more, it seems like we're stuck sort of dealing with this on our own, crowdsourcing, if you will, both awareness, which I hope will lead to more research, which I hope will lead to better treatments, and perhaps one day some measure of prevention. How can we contribute to research today? I know you have a couple of sources that our listeners would be interested in.
Yeah, so when I was struggling with all of this in the beginning, like I said, I did a lot of research and I came across a website, Stuff That Works, and it's a forum, and as you said, it provides crowdsourced information, in this case about frozen shoulder treatments. And I'm so grateful that I found this because, one road that I might have gone down was surgery. And when you start reading, because surgery is recommended at a point when it hasn't self-resolved in, so many months. And the result I've read from so many people who've gone through surgery is worse than where they were when they started. And I'm just so grateful that I found this site because, you can see what the most popular treatments are. And right now they have 1,700 contributors. So you can see the most popular treatments, the most effective treatments, and the most detrimental treatments. And just kind of learn, from others who are going through it, what's helped and what's hurt. And, there is a medical advisor assigned to the forum. You can ask questions, and I know, Marianne, you asked the question and people responded, and that's super helpful to see what others have to say. Now, this forum, this site was created by, it's Yael Elish, I think is how you pronounce her name. She was a core member of the WAYS founding team, and she'd spent decades researching information, medical information for family members, and she found over and over that the best information was coming from others who've experienced the condition, whatever it was. And so she, along with another gentleman, created this site. And, when I was going through it, it helped me just to breathe that others were dealing with the same thing. That validation. I wasn't alone anymore. This was real. And it was as severe. And Michelle, just what you said, it does feel like a knife is just you're stabbed with a knife. Just that sudden, you don't get a sound out. Your breath is taken away. You just can't explain it. And so I feel like if folks who are suffering with this, or if you know anyone who is, have them join this conversation at How Stuff Works. We'll include links, or Stuff That Works. Sorry. How Stuff Works is another website. So Stuff That Works, and specifically about frozen shoulder. And I feel like this is what it's going to take, because we can't perform, apparently, the studies that are required to get all of this information. It seems that we can't because we haven't. This is a way that we can all come together and share our story, and hopefully come up with some commonalities and figure out what causes it, because we don't know at this point what causes it.
Well, and Teresa, also show that we exist in large numbers. We're not talking one or two people here. All right. And I'm going to put this out there for our listeners to consider. If you are a perimenopausal or menopausal or postmenopausal, there's that word, woman, you are likely to be facing this head on at some point. The numbers bear that out. Yeah, if this does nothing more than raise awareness and provide tools to people, which, as Teresa said, we will have those on the Whole Care Network site where our podcast lives. You can dig into some of those resources, because I know there are a lot of people out there who are desperate for more information. And I want to wrap up today by thanking my guests. I also have some homework for my listeners. I want to hear your frozen shoulder stories on social media using the hashtag #MyFrozenShoulderStory. So again, the hashtag is #MyFrozenShoulderStory on social media. Share your stories, because I'm going to be following up on this topic in an upcoming episode. So Michelle and Teresa, thank you for sharing your stories, and join us next time on Us Versus Them, Patients and Caregivers Confront Healthcare.
This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time.